Hello? Hello, Samuel. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. We'll be starting by 10 on the dot.
Yeah, I just want to be sure that I'm clear.
Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome us to Anderson Tax webinar series. My colleagues will be coming live now, and we'll be introducing our panelists very shortly. It's a webinar series. We'll be facilitating this session.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Anderson Tax webinar series. This is the second session of the webinar series, and we're considering the topic tax compliance post-COVID-19, the challenges and opportunities. I have with me seasoned tax practitioners, Chinedu Exomike and Mr. Matthew Gonjubola from the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Chinedu Exomike is our partner at Commercial Practice and the Same Tax. I'll give a bit of background and then I'll do a little presentation so that we can set the tone for the topic, and then we'll have our panelists share their perspectives on the topic. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic is no longer in news, and when it came on the world, it came unannounced. That's financial, economic, security, and it's possible that it would even have food crisis implications on the world at large. So as we see these challenges beginning to ravel, the government is also having serious issues with its revenue, because the revenue is now under pressure. And you know, there are two twin shocks indeed, that of the COVID-19 on the one hand, and on the other hand, the dip in international oil price. When the government made the commendable move of passing the Finance Act 2019, it was with the aim of re-engineering tax administration and collection in Nigeria, and we had thought that they'll be able to bridge the tax to GDP ratio. I mean, with the help of the Finance Act between Nigeria and other similar developing economies. In fact, some stakeholders thought that the tax base would be redefined with the passage of the Act, and that there will be so much of fantastic tax collection. But again, you think about that popular phrase, health is wealth. It's never been more real to our generation. So there is the recommendation, the general recommendation now is that adopt physical distancing measures. And of course, it has its impact on economic activities, because economic activities are now being run at a lower scale and largely in a remote fashion. But then we know again that the FRS still has to do its work. That's the Federal Inland Revenue Service, and it's going to help the government in achieving the revenue targets. And of course, support businesses also in the most seamless manner. There is then a need for the FRS to tweak its modus operandi and, of course, communicate the way they will now be doing things to taxpayers to achieve overall effectiveness. Without a doubt, every challenge comes with opportunities for growth. And maybe the time has now come for private and public businesses to fully digitize, with the potential benefit of gaining a wider tax base. For instance, maybe the FRS will think of overhauling its e-support system for tax administration and payments for the greater good of the government and the society at large. It's on this note, I'll be considering the challenges and the opportunities that the COVID-19 pandemic presents to tax compliance in Nigeria. Like I said, I will go through a short presentation in about 5-10 minutes, just to set the tone to this discussion, because we got the feedbacks from our participants, and we saw a couple of questions, some relating to interpretation of the Finance Act, some about the FRS circular. But again, if you think about the topic, it's tax compliance post-COVID-19 challenges and opportunities. So I'll quickly go through the presentation on the topic, and then we come back to our panelists. The summary of the discussion is in 5 quotes. You think about the fact that the FIRS in itself has temporarily suspended penalties and interest on tax debts. That's on the one hand. On the other hand is that there is an extension of filing deadlines in light of previous policy reversals. The FIRS is saying, okay, so you don't need to file tax returns anymore at the time that we expected you. For instance, VAT and withholding tax filing that were meant to be filed by the 21st of the month following the month of transaction have been shifted by a month, have been shifted till the end of the month, the last working day of the month. So what's the implication of that for taxpayers in light of some things that we've seen the FIRS done in time past? What about the liquidity challenges that taxpayers are facing and the possible delayed remittance of taxes? Then remote tax audits. Is there any possibility for remote tax audits? And then we'll talk about utilizing technology. So on the one hand, like we said, you'll remember if you're following developments from the FIRS, and on the 30th of April this year, the FIRS informed taxpayers that it will waive penalties and interest on outstanding tax debts that came from previous tax audits, tax investigations, or desk reviews. And so what they are encouraging taxpayers to do is to utilize the waiver, but they must ensure that they pay by the end of May, 31st of May precisely. This waiver of penalties is part of the FIRS efforts to cushion the effect of COVID-19 pandemic on Nigerian taxpayers. But you know that some taxpayers are experiencing significant cash flows currently. So that also has implications for the taxpayers. Are they going to embrace it? When you think about previous handling of tax matters in Nigeria, in the case of, for instance, the FIRS has pushed the deadline for filing taxes till the last working day of the month for VAT and withholding tax. The due date for companies' income tax returns was also extended by 1 month, which means that those who were meant to submit their companies' income tax returns by the 30th of June will now be expected to submit same by the end of July. But of course, we've not seen anything with respect to petroleum profit tax that is ordinarily due by the end of May. There are instances in which the FIRS disregarded the principle of legitimate expectation in the past. And you know, the court even verified some of this practice, that the circular, for instance, of the FIRS is not law. It does not constitute law. So people then have the concerns that, okay, the FIRS has said do this. Is it possible that the FIRS will revert itself on these policies that they put out there? Again, businesses are going through some difficult times, loss of revenue, escalating costs, significant cash flow constraints. And all of these may impact the way taxpayers would also embrace the palliatives that the FIRS or the waivers, the cushioning effects that the FIRS is giving out to taxpayers. And some of them are reallocating their resources to other exigencies that they may consider more important and pressing to keep their entities afloat. So there is a need to strike a balance between tax remittances and settling other business obligations. And of course, you know that there could be penalties for late remittance post-COVID-19. The other one that everyone is embracing right now is the remote work system. And there are audits that have been suspended, for instance, when COVID came on board. The FIRS has also stopped the tax audit for some taxpayers that those audits were probably even at the reconciliation phases already. And the question that keeps popping is this: when exactly would the lockdown end? And if there is no answer to that, the next question would then be, when exactly are we going to start doing things? When are we going to start running economic activities? When will the FIRS continue to do go on with its normal activity. So we know that FIRS may be considering, or even other tax authorities, as we see in other nations, may begin to leverage remote working solutions to conduct tax audits going forward. And of course, this might also be a way to ease things out on the path of even the taxpayers as well, because they may not have to leave the comfort of their homes. If they have all the documents in the cloud, they just send them to the FIRS and the audits are conducted. So maybe you then find a situation where video conferencing facilities are also utilized to obtain clarifications from taxpayers where it's necessary. There is no doubt about the technology platforms that the FIRS, for instance, has put in place, being the leading tax authority in Nigeria. For instance, companies can register online after obtaining their registration number from the Corporate Affairs Commission. You can also process your TCCs online. You can file returns online. You can submit your transfer pricing returns online. You can make payments with ease. And then the FIRS has then brought up an automated platform for filing VAT returns as well, which is called eVAT or VATRAC. So these are some of the things that the FIRS has also introduced, but these are not with their own challenges. For instance, some of these initiatives are yet to be fully implemented. Sometimes some taxpayers still have to visit the FIRS to complete tax filings. Tax authorities will then need to digitize more of their processes to make compliance easy for taxpayers so that it will align with the remote working model if indeed this is going to be the new norm. Taxpayers should be able to submit responses to FIRS online without physically visiting the FIRS office. And of course, the FIRS has provided communication in this respect. So these are some of the things that the FIRS has done. But again, how early do you get those letters acknowledged by the FIRS officers? And what emails do you send those letters to? Who authorizes the acknowledgement of those letters? These are some of the issues that we'll be discussing. And so if we're going to see things move forward, especially with respect to tax compliance in Nigeria going forward, there is a need for full implementation of online platforms for easing the way administration of taxes is done, tax collection is done, and tax compliance is done. Going by the rankings of Nigeria on the World Bank Index on ease of paying taxes, you know that Nigeria fell by 2 indices the last time, and that means a lot. That if we are going to make things work in Nigeria, then we have to consider the ease of tax payments. Then how much do the taxpayers know? So there is need for more sensitization of taxpayers, and of course security and data privacy is also very important as you start sharing data online. These are some of the things that we'll be considering. Again, I have the pleasure of inviting panelists and introducing them fully to the House. I have with me again Chinedu Ezomike is a partner commercial practice at Anderson Tax. I also have Mr. Matthew Bonjibola, is the Director and Head of Tax Policy at the Federal Inland Revenue Service. We've gotten a couple of questions from participants, and we'll be bringing these questions on board for people to, for panelists to address these questions. But I just want to ask in the first place, just to set the tone and to start the conversation. Mr. Bonjibola, I don't know if you can try and help us. What are the key challenges that the FIRS sees with tax compliance, given this current situation at hand?
Good morning, listeners, and thank you to Mr. Okwe for bringing me onto this program. And I also welcome my co-panelist, Chinedu. It's a pleasure being part of this. I think when we talk about challenges of tax compliance, it is not only during the COVID-19 era. We have been having challenges with compliance in this part of the world. And that is not just Nigeria, but across developing countries. And that has to do with a whole number of issues. Principal among those issues are issues of our perception of our government, which in itself has a whole lot to do with our tax morality, where you find that average persons from developing countries will feel justified not paying taxes, or can even boast of not paying taxes. But for me to come back to your specific question on the environment of the challenges we are having now, in your introduction, you have mentioned some of the issues. Many businesses are more concerned now with, so to such businesses, tax compliance is secondary. Even individuals who have had to be locked down at home, particularly people who are artisans, who are traders, who largely depend on daily to survive. If they are locked down for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or thereabout, and are unable to go out to do their businesses, I'm sure the first thing in their minds will not be tax compliance. The first thing in their minds will be how to make ends to meet. And then we know that the level of our infrastructure is still developing. For example, as I'm talking to you, I'm not sure I'm running on the public power system. I have to run on private power system, and not many Nigerians could afford that. And so even if you want to do things by remote, by online, how many of us are able to participate? Even if we look at this program as important as it is and very appealing, how many people are able to join in this program? Because either the networks within our communities are not working optimally, or sometimes are totally down. So there are a lot of issues around tax compliance, particularly in this time that we are in. I think let me stop there for the sake of time, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bonjibal. And I mean, that's speaking from an experienced perspective, really. I would like Chinedu to share his perspectives also on whether there are really opportunities. Do you think there are opportunities by the fact that remote working is now the order of the day? From a tax perspective, from a tax administrator's perspective, and maybe from a taxpayer's perspective as well, do you see opportunities?
Okay, thank you so much, Temitope, for having me, and thanks, Bonjumala, for coming on the program. First of all, to say that you did a very good summary of the issues in your opening statements. I mean, I think you covered it very well.
Thank you.
Yeah, COVID-19 is a unique situation, which I don't think any of us has ever envisaged that the world can be in this kind of situation in this time. We thought as a civilization we have overcome such challenges, but be that as it may, there are always opportunities in every such situation. In tax practice, I think we have actually known that e-taxation, or what you call tax technology, is the future of tax. What COVID-19 has done is to basically bring it forward. The good news is that we, both as FIRS and as taxpayers, have started the journey gradually. The bad news is that we're not there yet. Like you mentioned, FIRS has been talking about e-taxation, e-payment, e-filing, and all that. As early as 2013, we were already talking about iTax, the integrated tax administration system, and document management and all that online. Sometime a few years ago, we're talking about withholding tax management online and all that. So some steps have been taken in that regard. But I guess the opportunity that COVID-19 brings is to then speed things up. Because when we talk about post-COVID-19, a few weeks ago or a few months ago, some of us were thinking, okay, you lock down, you resolve the issues, then you reopen. When Wuhan shut down and for months, and then the COVID-19 was kind of chased away from town, and they reopened. But you know that even Wuhan now are having new cases. So it does appear that post-COVID-19 won't really be the way some of us thought it will be. There won't be a day when everything just resolves and we go back to work as it used to be. We might live with this situation for a while. So if you assume that, let's say a year from now, we will still have some aspects of social distancing, we are still having some measure of lockdowns here and there, life has to go on somehow. And I believe that is where tax technology then comes in. To tell ourselves that if this is the way we're going to live for the next 12 to 18 months, at least before a proper vaccine comes out and all that, what is going to happen? How do we continue our business, both as taxpayers and as tax administrators? So that is where I see the opportunities to then quickly ramp up those tax technology solutions. Because if today you say, let's say 50 to 60% of taxpayers should really go online and file their returns and submit their documents, I'm not sure that the existing technology systems, even for the tax administrators, can handle such volume. I know that there was a time, even like 2 years ago, when FIRS really tried to push that people should start using the online systems, but there were a lot of challenges, both with technology, both from the taxpayers' end, and of course from the FIRS end. So those challenges are things that we need to be looking at clearly now to resolve. And this opportunity to then focus squarely to say, if this is going to be the future, if this is going to be the new way we do business, how do we ensure that this works? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nedu. Thank you very much. We'll be going to the specifics in terms of a question that just gives the background to the topic from the panelists' end. But I would like to mention for our participants that you can send in your questions through the chat box. We're going to pick up your questions there and answer them specifically towards the end of the session, but you can start sending in your questions. Now to Mr. Gonjibola, on the 6th of April, the FIRS released a statement on palliative measures to cushion the effects of COVID-19 on taxpayers. And one of these measures is the waiver of late returns penalty for taxpayers who pay early and file later. Those who pay in this manner are given the opportunity to send in supporting documents to the FIRS via dedicated emails as an alternative to visiting the FIRS offices. And we also know that there was a public notice of 30th April 2020, and the FIRS had assured that it would waive all penalties and interest for all taxpayers as long as they pay their tax debt in full on or before 31st of May 2020. And of course, there was an emphasis on or before 31st May 2020. Mr. Gonjibola, would like to know what gave rise to this initiative.
Thanks, Temitope, for that question. But maybe just give me 30 seconds to add something to what Chinedu highlighted as the opportunities of this moment. Because it's not just talking about tax. We should also be talking about generating revenue. We should be talking about developing the economy. Now, since the whole world has been under lockdown, we can see a whole lot of business opportunities for IT specialists. I believe that I still went wrong temporarily there. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
So I was saying that we should business persons, our specialists in IT, to begin to develop products that would generally sell now. For example, all of our schools now are locked down. If somebody is able to develop a good educational program online, I'm sure many children will benefit, and that person will also make money. That's just the thing to add to what Chinedu has said. Now, as to your question, I'm sure you know that the Federal Revenue Service is driven by service. And that is our main job, which is to provide service to our taxpayers. Now, when this issue of lockdowns, issue of social distancing came, we had to ask ourselves, what does this say to our taxpayers? And we understood that many of them, majority of our taxpayers, want to be compliant, but they can't go out. They can't go to their offices. Auditors couldn't come to their offices to audit their records, and therefore they couldn't probably produce their audited financial statement. Tax practitioners that they have engaged could not work in their premises so that they could have their tax returns. And so we understand this, but we also know that many of them have idea of what their tax liabilities are. And so what we did was to say initially, just pay your tax liabilities. Don't worry about coming to our offices to do filing of returns. And don't also worry that penalties will begin to mount. We'll waive that. And then when we realized that what we thought, just like Chinedu said, what we thought would be just 1 week, 2 weeks, it's becoming 8 weeks now. Then we saw that it goes beyond just people who want to do VAT filing or withholding tax filing. It's extended to people who want to do corporate income tax filing. It's extended to people who have tax liabilities arising from tax audit, investigation, or other similar exercises. And so what we then did to say, okay, let's extend this waiver of penalty to everyone who has tax liability, and such that you are able to make your payment of the principal, and you don't have to pay penalties for late payment. You don't have to worry about penalty for late filing of your returns if you are able to do your payments by 31st of May of this year. And I also can tell you that we have continued to monitor the situations, and I'm sure very soon there will be more communication from the Federal Revenue Service and probably more palliatives to make things a lot easier for our teeming taxpayers. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much, sir. Chinedu, I don't know, do you see challenges with the conservative spending measures that some taxpayers are adopting during these uncertain times? Yes, the FIRS has presented an open check, come and pay your outstanding tax debts and we'll waive the penalties and interest. But some taxpayers are then saying, hey, I need to find a way to manage my finances during this time. Does this portend any challenge to this policy by the FIRS?
Of course, definitely there are challenges, and I would say a lot of challenges. Because of the shutdown situation, the economy basically ground to a halt. Many companies are not even able to collect their own debts. So cash management becomes extremely important. People have to then prioritize because there is this saying that companies can survive without profits, but they really can't survive without cash.
Sure.
So how to conserve cash and how to manage cash becomes very important for companies, and people have to prioritize things like staff salary. and other very important expenses that you need to make to even keep your business going, utilities and all that. Companies are looking at prioritizing that first. So the issue really is, how do you find the balance between keeping your business going and being able to still meet some obligations? Because on the other hand, you need to appreciate that tax debts are really preferential debts. Even when companies are going under liquidation, tax debts are up there on the things you have to pay first. So it's a balancing act. If you take taxes like VAT and withholding tax, even PAYE for states, you appreciate that they are not really the company's taxes. These are taxes that the company or taxpayer has collected as an agent, either PAYE collected from staff or VAT collected from the customers. You are supposed to just remit to the FIRS. And the good thing is that FIRS understands the situation and they are open to discussions, even instrumental payments plans if you need that. So it's really a real, treasury function, real tax cash management situation, so that you can still meet your obligations. What I would advise companies to do is to take a hard look at the cash flow situation and then see what they can do to keep meeting those obligations. So clearly, businesses have to survive first. It's even in the interest of the FIRS that the business survives. I'm sure if the FIRS has the option of letting business survive and paying their taxes, they want the business to survive so that business can pay their taxes, even in the future. So business have to survive first. Staff salaries, utilities, and other things that enhance business have to be taken into, have to be prioritized. But tax debts are also quite important. So finding that balance becomes very critical.
Okay, thank you very much, Chinedu. And I'll now come to Mr. Agbonjibola, because Chinedu has said a couple of things with respect to balancing the act. But again, we know that some taxpayers think that the window is quite short. So, Mr. Agbonjibola, I know that the FIRS has considered taxpayers' interest in putting this waiver forward for taxpayers to utilize, but then it's also a revenue generation strategy for the FIRS. So in the event that some taxpayers are unable to take advantage of the window, what does it mean for tax collection for Nigeria in the next couple of months, say 6 months from now?
Thanks very much for that question. I think I'll just stop from where Chinedu stopped, because he's done a very wonderful job there. Now, it's a serious balancing act. And what are we balancing? What we are balancing is government revenue, which in itself equates the ability of government to provide public goods, security, health. Even for those who have been afflicted by this COVID-19, I read in the news released by Lagos State Governor that it cost Lagos State 100,000 naira at the minimum to treat a patient of COVID-19. Everyone had been treated free. As at the last time I checked, we had over 4,500 cases. So if you multiply that by 100,000 naira each, then we can know what sum the government is spending even on this. Now, if totally stops coming in, then the ability of government to even provide that which will make the business persons and their businesses to survive is compromised totally. And this is the real balance that we need to strike. So we now need to ask ourselves, Do we stop paying the policemen, the military, the ex-personnel, providing medications, even for those who are afflicted by this COVID-19? Or do we find a way of splitting the available resources to, one way or the other, keep the businesses going and also ensure that government is able to provide those critical public goods? So this is the real balancing act. Sincerely, the future is not for the revenue that should come in or that should not come in. The future we should be looking at is the survival of Nigerians, survival. If all taxes stop coming in, then there is no way businesses can survive, because they could keep all the cash. I mean, those of people who live in Lagos, I mean, when the shutdown started, we had cases of robbers running riots in different communities. So this is what we need to balance. So I therefore urge taxpayers that here we should look beyond our businesses surviving. We should look now at our nation surviving. We should look at our citizens who are the customers of those businesses surviving. We should look at the survivor of our democracy, because again, if the government is unable to provide basic things, then anything could happen. So this is where the balancing work it is very, very important. And therefore, I will continue to encourage and appeal and plead with our taxpayers that as we are striving to make our businesses to survive, we must know that the survival of our businesses depend on the survival of our society and of our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. The other thing that concerns me right now is whether there is a possibility of the FRS even expanding the waiver of penalty to mirror the kind of voluntary assets and income declaration scheme that was run some time ago. Of course, the FRS talked about the successes that that scheme achieved. And I'm just thinking, and I'm not directing this to Mr. Bonjibola because I'm not sure if the management has considered it or they will be thinking about it. But I'm just saying, if the FRS is thinking about this, Chinedu, what do you think? Do you think there will be benefits for the FRS or even for the government? And again, going back to the point that Mr. Bonjibola made, it's about the survival of Nigeria. So are there benefits in going into a scheme that would mirror the voluntary assets and income declaration scheme, knowing full well that that spanned for about 9 months?
I mean, thanks very much, Toby. And I really like the way Bonjibola summarized the issue, because when we look at it that way, you start seeing that taxpayers and the revenue officials are really partners in the survival of both the country as an entity and the individual businesses. So it's not this or that. It's really how to ensure that both survive. I think that's a very important point that he made. Businesses cannot survive outside the survival of the entity called Nigeria. So that I mean, that's a very good point. And that then delves into the issue of VADES. I think like Bonjibola mentioned earlier, FRS is a service entity focused on serving the taxpayers. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure they are open, or they will be open to whatever makes the service delivery efficient. It doesn't have to be an order from the federal government like VADES and all that. But I'm sure they will be open to whatever will help the taxpayers to meet the obligations. And to be honest, even before the FRS issued that directive, I know that in cases where taxpayers had taxes to pay, maybe they came upon a liability that hadn't been paid over time, and they approached the FIRS leadership to reach an agreement on how to pay. They have always been open to such discussions. So I'm sure any taxpayer that is willing to engage the FIRS on how to remit outstanding taxes without penalties will definitely find a listening ear. The one aspect that I want to emphasize is the issue of trust. I mentioned before that it's like a partnership between the taxpayers and the FIRS. After the VATES program, there was some kind of feedback from most people who took advantage of that VATES, because what happened was that many companies came and declared the liability that they had and had, payment plans. So some had 18 months and all that, because even the VATES program granted that you could have even more than that. But subsequently, when FIRS come under squeeze for cash, they tended to go back to even some of those people that had declared their debts and who had a payment plan, to kind of change the agreements and all that and put pressure on them to pay outside the payment plan. And therefore, I think that such actions kind of breach the trust between the taxpayers and the authorities. And then you see that even some people that didn't bother to take advantage of the VATES program appear to be the wise ones to say, oh, I'm not going to declare my debt to anyone because the people that declared didn't get a good deal. So I think in the renewed partnership for survival of the both parties, that trust becomes very, very important. That when people come out and declare or come out to discuss, the FIRS should also honor such discussions and ensure that, so that will encourage even more people to come out. So whether it is under a formal VATES program or whether it is on one-on-one conversation, what's important is there is constant communication between taxpayers and tax administrators, and that trust continues to be enhanced.
Thank you very much for that, Chinedu. And that leads me to the second point that I'll be considering, the extension of tax returns deadlines and the fear of future policies somersault. I know that many are quick to assume a byproduct of time, but the palliative in the real sense is only an action that is intended to make the effects of the problem less severe. It's temporary in nature. It's a makeshift measure. It's only an improvisation. So the government will not be able to keep up with the palliatives as long as it has, would only be able to do this for as long as it has resources to do this, such as tax inflows as well. And that's what Mr. Bonjibola has repeatedly made mention of, about the balancing act, about us having a surviving Nigeria. So I'll then ask Mr. Bonjibola, is it possible for taxpayers to get assurances that the FIRS will not retrospectively reverse its policy with respect to the timeline, the extended timeline? Because there is that fear that, okay, the FIRS has come and given us this, but like Chinedu also said, the bail scheme came and some people were concerned about, oh, is the trust not breached in a way? So is it possible to get those sort of assurances that the FIRS will not reverse its policies?
Thanks for that question, and maybe I should pick it from one of your opening comments when you suggested that the FIRS had disregarded in the past the principle
Sorry, we can't hear you.
from the
Sorry, we lost you for a moment. I don't know if you can take those comments again.
I'll start all over again.
Right,
I was saying that I'll pick this from your earlier comments, suggesting that the FIRS had in the past disregarded the principle of legitimate expectation. And I was saying that I would disagree with that suggestion. The FRS is a government institution that is run by law and that operates by the principles of the rule of law. Now, as an organization which is peopled by Nigerians, we are not perfect, and we are not claiming to be perfect. And sometimes, because of the limited use of technology, you get some individuals making rulings that are not actually consistent with the law, and there was no way of cross-checking this before they go out to the public. Now, if they go out to the public, we need to ask ourselves, this ruling, is it consistent with the law? If it is not consistent with the law, we are never ashamed to say we are wrong. And probably this is what is being misinterpreted as disregarding the principle of legitimate expectation. Then another point here is the fact that there's hardly any concession you receive anywhere without condition. In essence, there are always conditions for enjoying some specific palliatives. And so if a taxpayer falls short of that condition, then definitely it cannot enjoy the incentive or the palliatives. And a lot of time people don't come out with the whole story. Or they say, oh, but FRS said I'm entitled to this. When I went there to claim it, they refused me. No, it is not always like that. We also need to ask, are all the underlying met? If they are met, then you really do not have an entitlement to that incentive. So these are issues we have had in the past. Apart from the fact that we have had a number of court rulings that has made it very clear, even when arrest issues, and that is a general principle of law. So now let's come back to your specific question. One thing I can assure you with the current management, and of course with all the management of the FRS that I ever worked with, is that we never deny our agreements. No, we don't. And if anything comes from us properly, from FRS, even when we are wrong, we stick to that. Even when we have made such pronouncement in error, as long as we are the one who have come out to say we are doing this, then we stick to it. We could draw a line and say, look, by so line, this one can go again. So I can assure everyone listening to me that whatever the FRS has brought out as a palliative, as an incentive or an encouragement during this period, as long as all the conditions are met, you can reasonably expect to enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And I mean, the point I take from that is that, I mean, when waivers like these are granted, there are conditions, and taxpayers need to ensure that they follow those conditions, they meet those conditions, so that they can also cover their own ground in respect of enjoying those waivers. But then I would like to ask, because taxpayers are asking that the extension of filing deadline, would it be extended to petroleum profit tax returns as well? The actual petroleum profit tax returns is due by 31st of May. That's the end of this month. And people are concerned whether the FRS is also considering extending the timeline for that filing.
Thanks for that question. Now, let me say that the issue we have at hand is not a one-off event. I mean, we keep monitoring the situations as they go. We know that the upstream oil and gas industry operate by a different set of rules. And therefore, that is why they have a separate law that guides their operation. And so we also are dialoguing with the operators in that sector because there are not very many. So it's very easy for the FRS to reach out to every one of them one-on-one, and which we are continuing to do through the OPTS, which we are already always having direct interaction and engagement. So I'm sure if whatever we are agreeing to deal with that industry is already been is going to be passed across to them directly, and because, like I said, there are not that many, so we really don't have to resort to issues like public notices or DRFI because we know them and they know us, and we have a platform, we have constant engagement together. So in essence, we will recognize, we will look at their issues directly, which I'm sure we're already doing. We're engaging with the OPTS. So if there's any need for us to have any extension of time with them, surely we'll do that and communicate, dial with them. But if there's no need for that, all of us will know that. And when I say all of us, the FRS and the OPTS, we will get to know about that, and then we will just move forward. But I can tell you that we are catering for all segments of our taxpayers, and none of them, whether you are small, whether you are medium, whether you are big, whether you are in financial institutions or you are into oil and gas, we are looking at everybody, and we are communicating based on the peculiarity of each sector. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Now I'll ask Chinedu if, and this is like two questions in one. Are there additional measures that you think the FRS should consider introducing to ensure that the impact of COVID-19 on businesses is cushioned effectively? And specifically why I said two questions in one. One is for big companies, so to speak, and the other is with respect to small and medium enterprises. Given that, again, the Finance Act came with the idea of giving some sort of special arrangement for SMEs.
Okay, thanks, Toby. I think the FIS have really done a fantastic job so far, and I want to really commend them. One of the key principles of taxation is clarity and certainty. And the FRS constantly communicating with people to provide that clarity and certainty, for me, that's very commendable. There have been so many circulars providing directions on what companies should do and how they should go about implementing the Finance Act and all that. And I think that's quite very good. The FRS is not the federal government. They don't have a large purse to start providing loans and all that, which is what most businesses did now. But I think within what they can do, they have done quite a bit. I would just encourage the FRS to continue to see themselves as tax administrators rather than just tax collectors. When you wear the cap of administration, it just like Bondola is saying, it enhances your view. It even helps you to sit down and try to understand the businesses you're trying to tax. I believe that as the more you understand the business, the easier it is for you to have discussions with them on how best to go about taxing. If you think just about collection, just like some FIS officers tend to do, it becomes a we against them situation. But if you think of administration in terms of how do I help you to be able to pay your taxes better, what kind of issues do you have? You know, in the past, we have had certain issues in the tax laws that lingered for decades. And, you know, the same issues over. What an administrator will do is to keep looking for those problems that tax payers have, and keep looking for ways to provide clarity, provide certainty, so that when a taxpayer is computing his taxes or filing his returns, it knows that he has fully complied with the law, and so that we keep minimizing the gray areas. So I think in that area, the new FRS has really done a good job in that regard. I want to commend them.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Mr. Mojibola, there are companies that basically just incorporated, they are new altogether and did not generated significant revenue, if any at all. So are there things that they should, are there tax obligations that they should comply with, and how do they do that? This is coming from some of our taxpayers. I would readily say that ordinarily they are expected to submit their tax returns whether they have revenue or not as such. But I don't know, from your end, is there anything that the FRS is considering for those kind of companies? Are they still expected to comply fully with the filing requirements?
Thanks, Software. You know that when we talk about compliance obligations for tax purposes, it's not just about paying taxes. Yeah. It begins with registration and obtaining tax identification number, submission of returns as may be due, whether under income tax, VAT, or CGT or withholding taxes, or PAYE. It includes issues of providing information that may be required from time to time, and so on. And so when we talk therefore about the obligations of a company, whether new or old, under the tax law, they are fairly numerous, but yet specific. Now, and these are not conditioned most often on whether income is made or not. For example, if I take a company, Section 55(1) and 2 provides a requirement for every company, even for those who are exempt from incorporation, also including those who may not be liable to tax, to file returns. And you can see that a company which had not generated income may not be subject to tax because there's no profit to tax, but yet the law still expects that company to provide a return. So these are statutory obligations. Now, but the question is there something that could be done to soften the requirement burden, particularly for a new company which had yet to make revenue? And this, before COVID, it has always been there. Because after registering for tax and having the tax identification number, the companies also has a opportunity to contact the FRS and say, look, I have not even begun business. I am still dormant. So as a result of my dormancy, I know I have these obligations that I should perform, but can you excuse me? I mean, FRS have always been attending to such requests and be granting such a soft landing for entities that have yet to commence operations. Now, even for those who have commenced operations, who probably have yet to start making money, don't forget that they have employees and they have to remit PAYE to the respective tax authority. Some of them probably are already having taxable supplies under VAT, and we have to render the VAT returns. So all those obligations must still go on. And if we now come back to the palliatives provided by the service with respect to the COVID-19, then such companies also are able to enjoy all those palliatives. Maybe in summary, what I say here is one, where a company actually had not commenced operations, but it has registered It is waiting for this COVID-19 to subside before it commences business. All it needs to do is just do a letter to the relevant office and say, look, I am not able to start my business for now. So because of that, I will not be rendering withholding tax because I don't have any. I will not be rendering PAYE. I don't have staff yet, and all of that. The service takes note of that. Oh, I've actually begun businesses, but now COVID-19 is affecting my business. So I don't even know whether I'm going to make a profit or loss, or I can't even get my auditors to come and look at my books. So I need extension of time. The law allows FRS to grant extension of time. And then in addition to the specific COVID-19 palliative that has been granted. So this is the way I'm going to look at this. I don't know whether I satisfy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. But I can imagine that some of my participants are wondering that these tax obligations are really not going away. So I'll come to Chinedu. Remote working has become the new normal, more or less. So what steps can taxpayers take to ensure that they reconfigure their internal processes to ensure compliance with all the necessary tax and regulatory obligations specifically?
I mean, I think the steps to be taken are clear in terms of some of the things we have been discussing. Because if this is the new normal, the issue, like I said earlier, is how do we, or how do I as a taxpayer be able to live, do my business, and be able to satisfy all my tax requirements under these conditions. So you're basically talking about the tax function of the future, being able to transform your current tax function to be able to operate in the new environment. And like I mentioned earlier, FRS has done a lot in terms of e-filing, e-payment, and all that. The one critical area that I think both taxpayers and even the FRS need to pay a lot of attention to is document management. One of the biggest issues we have even during audits is about documentation. It's not just enough to do something, you need to be able to demonstrate what you have done. So that if an auditor is looking for an audit evidence or trying to understand the processes that you took, it is clear what you've done. So companies need to pay much more attention to this in terms of how they organize their processes, their ledgers, their contracts, and other supporting documents, such that even if you're going to file returns online, what kind of support documents are you able to provide? If FRS decides tomorrow that, which I think they should be looking at, doing online audit also, or being able to do audit from their offices, what kind of documents should they be requesting? And will companies be able to provide such documents? I know that even during audits, physical audits, sometimes it takes companies a long time to provide required documentations for review. So document management and the tax processes are things that I think companies need to really look at. But it might also help for FRS to continue to provide guidance, like I said before. In the, I know they have a standard list of documents they always want to see, but you know, the more you understand the business, the better you are able to audit that business. So in terms of what are the real documents that you need to be able to, first of all, file your tax returns and to be able to review the tax return filed, and how will the company be able to, first of all, keep those records and then be able to provide it if and when they are required by the FRS. I think that is where companies will be thinking, process management and document management.
Thank you very much, Chinedu. I'll go to my third issue here, which is about liquidity challenges and how that would impact remittance of taxes. Again, many companies are currently experiencing liquidity challenges, and the reality is that the need for the balance will not make the FRS suspend payment of taxes right now, regardless of the plight of taxpayers, the plight of companies. And one of the things that the FRS had even communicated via its press release of April the 6th is to inform taxpayers facing foreign exchange challenges about sourcing for the sourcing for forests to offset their tax liabilities, that they could explore the possibility of converting those currencies to Naira using the investors and exporters forex windows rate on the date of payment. So clearly, the FRS still wants the payment to be done. So the question I'll then ask Mr. Mojibola is this: the FRS will not stop collecting taxes, but does the FRS intend to assist taxpayers with tax liability payment arrangements such as installment payments and all? Is the FRS open to that?
Thanks, Zokwe, for that question. It's not that the FRS will not want to suspend payment of taxes. I will say that it will not be held for Nigeria for tax payment to cease, because it does. As of today, we all know that oil is no longer selling in the market. I'm sure you remember that sometimes last month, for the very, very first time in the history, oil futures sold in the negative. That is, a seller will have to give money to the buyer in order to buy his oil. It has never happened, but it happened last month. When we had the budget for 2020, we said $57 per barrel as benchmark. As of today, oil is selling for well below $30 per barrel. It went as low as $14 at the time. So which means, and not only just means, before we go there, what is the cost of production of one barrel? $33 it costs to produce a barrel. Now, if we sell 33, for every barrel we sell, we make a loss. That's exactly what it means. So which means PPT, you are guaranteed to be zero. It means that even the revenue that should come to government by way of oil is going to be negative, because then we have to make more cash calls in order to cover the operating costs. So what are we expecting from oil this year? Close to zero. And so the only way that government will run, apart from the huge borrowings that we are engaging in, is by way of tax that will come in. That is how we are going to be able to pay for those medical personnel. That's where we are going to be able to pay for those policemen who are guarding our offices because we are on lockdown. That's how we are able to do whatever we are able to do. So it is not FRS not willing to suspend payment of taxes. It is not good for the health of every Nigerian, every taxpayer, to suspend payment of taxes during this time. Now, your question specifically, with FRS, I mean, Chinedu had said this severally in his responses. We've always been willing to talk to our taxpayer one-on-one. Tell us the issues. Give us your proposals. Because we are only able to collect tax from you as long as you are alive, as long as your business is alive. We know that, and we recognize that, and we work by that. And so we will look at you, you come to us, and then we will discuss, and then we agree your payment terms with you. So, I mean, that has always been our principle, and it will continue, at least for the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. And I'll then go to Chinedu, because I mean, your comments, your landing comments leads to this next question for Chinedu. How do you think taxpayers should strike the balance between tax remittances and the shifting attention to business expenses that are required to keep companies afloat? going by what Mr. Bonjibola has said, it's possible to arrange a payment, installment, and all of that. And I know you've made some comments on this earlier, but specifically with respect to tax remittances and the shifting attention to business expenses that are required to keep companies afloat. How do you think companies should strike that balance, really?
Utility
I think there is a bit of network glitch from your end. Maybe we'll come back to that question. Mr. Bonjibola, if you can hear me, the reality is that sometimes there is a need to enforce compliance. And will the FRS be thinking of enforcing compliance during this period? And how will the FRS do that? I think you are muted.
Yes, I've realized that. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you.
Every country has a compliance model. And the compliance model will drive enforcement where necessary. Now, yes, even before the COVID-19 era, we have had issues with taxpayers who would not voluntarily comply, who will not comply even when you prompt them or you prod them. And so we have had instances where we have to employ our enforcement powers. It also won't stop during COVID-19, where it is considered necessary. Now, one thing we have done, maybe it's an opportunity for me to clarify one of the issues raised with respect to stoppage of tax audits and investigation. What actually was stopped was the physical field visits to taxpayers' offices is actually what we have stopped or suspended for now. Reconciliation issues, provision of additional information, documents are going on where they could be done remotely. Remote meetings are happening for reconciliation. So when we go now back to an issue of enforcement, we also have other mediums of enforcement without resorting to physical movements. For example, if you look at the tax law, there are a number of things that the service is empowered to do. Some of them do not require physical visits. For example, we could put a lien on the property of an individual, of a taxpayer, or we could appoint an agent who has the money of the taxpayer who is defaulting, and appoint that a person as an agent of collection of purposes under Section 81 of CETA. So there are quite a number of things we can do during this time, but a number of them we will hold back because in recognition of this time. But if the reality is that we have to do those things, we will certainly do them. But my constant appeal to taxpayers is we shouldn't get to the level where we begin enforcement activities. They are usually very costly, both for the taxpayer and the tax authority. They are time-consuming, and sometimes they also damage our reputations, both the reputation of the taxpayer and that of the tax authority. So my appeal is that don't let us get to the level where we begin to employ enforcement tools. Let us comply. If you have issues with compliance, wherein you require the assistance of the service, please come to us. We will listen to you. We will work together with you. We are actually not on opposing sides. We are on the same side, and we are actually on your side. So please come to us. We'll discuss this. We agree, and then we'll see how I assist you to comply. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm sure that my participants, over 100 of them, are now thinking that physical or remote audits is what we're going with right now. So there's really no doubt about that anymore. But what I would like to know, maybe before we even go to that, Chinedu, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Sorry, I think I lost.
Okay, I think we'll just have you take that point again on how to balance things. Mr. Ponchbola had said a couple of things on how would the FIRs wouldn't want a situation where they go into enforcement actions now, and that it's better for taxpayers to comply voluntarily. So the question really here is for you, how do you think taxpayers should be striking that balance between tax remittance and the fact that they also need to pay for some business expenses that will keep their companies afloat? How do you think they need to address that specifically?
Yeah, thank you. So like I was saying, it's really a pure treasury function in terms of cash inflow versus outflow, and also maintaining some level of cash reserve for emergencies. So companies have to look at how much cash is flowing in, first of all, and then what are the obligations. I think the important point is to ensure that the tax debt is treated like one of the priority payments. And like I was saying, especially when you have taxes like VAT and withholding tax, which are not really your taxes, which you are essentially an agent of government, which you have collected. And I'm saying that it's not. Thankfully, you don't have to pay everything in bulk, so you can squeeze it in somehow within your cash plans for, say, a 6 months period, depending on how much is coming in. I mean, there are companies that are really completely shut down and not receiving even any payment at all. That's understandable. In that kind of situation, you might have to look for a deferral to say, okay, in 3 months' time we'll start paying. But I'm saying that planning is extremely important at this point. Cash planning extremely important because, like Bonjula said, it's the FIs just cannot afford to stop collecting taxes, and we can't have all the taxpayers not pay. So even if you have a few taxpayers who are not able to pay, I agree that there are a lot who, if they see tax as a very important obligation, they should be able to squeeze it in within their cash mapping for the period. Okay,
thank you very much. We have about 13 minutes to come to the end of this webinar. So I would like that participants should send in their questions if you have any. But very quickly, we'll run through the last 2 points that I would like us to consider. And it's with respect to what Mr. Bonjbola has said. Tax audits are not really suspended. So we think that there is a remote conduct of tax audits at the moment. So the question from my end to Mr. Bonjbola is this: what are the potential tax audit issues that would arise as a result of this relaxation? Do you think that it's going to come to a point where the FIRs would say, bring your documents physically to our office, and how does the FIRs intend to address those, given that there is also the physical distancing measures that is meant to be adopted?
Thanks, Tokwe. And as we speak, the Federal Inland Revenue Service had adopted a policy of physical distancing. And for example, we have suspended physical meetings with taxpayers. Even where as officials we have to meet with ourselves, we have to limit the number of people who could congregate in a room. We also have had to adopt other means of holding our meetings. So taking it from there, we are not expecting taxpayers unless it becomes critical to visit our offices for now. And where you have to, there are regimes you'll be subjected to before you are admitted into our premises. Now, if we relate that to tax audits, then what we then have is where we require additional information, you are allowed to send them in by mail or other means that are secured, because again, we are mindful of taxpayer confidentiality, because under the law, section 53, section 50, section 3 of FRS Act, taxpayer information is confidential and should not be handled in a way that could expose it to unauthorized persons. So once we are able to agree with the taxpayer a secure way of sending such pieces of information, then we will get that information. For example, all our offices have email addresses, official email addresses, not Yahoo addresses, or not social media addresses. So which you can transact your business with us securely, and where your data are very secured. And I refer back to Chinedu's point the other time when he said the key issue here is to have a document handling system that is appropriate. FRS had installed at our level some measures of document processing, whereby we could receive your document remotely and we are able to access them within our system and use them for our purposes. In rounding up, because of our time now, is the fact that yes, we are not doing physical visits. We are also not expecting you to physically come to our offices for reconciliation meetings, unless it's become extremely important that you come to our offices. But all our offices have official FRS email domain where you could send your documents, your information, and where we require to have a meeting. Then we could also do remote meeting. I mean, this morning before this webinar, I had to just finish a meeting with taxpayer before I joined this webinar. So FRS is equipped to have remote meetings, reconciliation meetings with our taxpayers, and these measures will continue until we are able to again resort to having physical meetings. But one thing I can also bring out of this is that even after COVID-19, these measures will still have to continue, because we are talking about how to make things easy, how to make payment of taxes easy. So there's no way we'll drop remote meetings. I mean, we are upscaling our systems so that we can do full e-filing of returns and document handling. So we will get there, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bonjola. And I like the fact that that response is comprehensive. You mentioned something about official email addresses. And I'll tell you for a fact that there are instances where some persons have sent they've sent responses to those official email addresses, but they didn't get an acknowledgement. So I'll ask Chinedu, do you think, I mean, Mr. Bonjola has said not Yahoo mails, not Gmails. Are these official email addresses sufficient? Do we need to get the exact officer's official email addresses? Then how valid do you think e-objections are when there are delays in acknowledgements to those responses? And again, how valid are e-signatures? I don't know, Chinedu, can you help us with that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the first thing is to say that the Finance Act has really given the official stamp to communication by email, which I think is a very good thing. Before now, there are questions about whether if you send objections or assessments by email, whether it's really considered valid. Now we know it is valid. The question, like what I mentioned, is how to make sure that the system is then secure. So, and when you're communicating to the FRS, you're communicating to the FRS as an official entity. So I don't think it's appropriate to use personal email of individuals. I think it has to be the office email. What has to happen at the end of the FRS's end is to then make sure that those emails are properly manned and that proper responses are given. The same way when you submit a fiscal document, you get an acknowledgement stamp. There should be a methodology that at least to get, even if it's an automated response, to say, okay, we have received this email and we will attend to it. I think that's very important. So official emails have come to stay, and that should be the way going forward. The challenge, like Obadola said, is for bulky documents. So if you're going to send in scanned documents, can the emails, would there be a limit to what emails can take? Those are the challenges that we need to be looking at. But definitely that is the way to go. If the emails are just like within companies, I mean, people negotiate contracts now by email and sign off by email, and e-signature is valid and accepted on contracts for between commercial business partners. So I don't see why that would be different for FIRS. I think that's very valid. Now I'm talking about Finance Act. There's some aspects of Finance Act that I think the FIRS should take a quick look at, because we're talking about raising money and funds for the country. And I commended the FIRS for having issued so much circulars this period to clarify things. I still think that the issue of significant economic presence is something they need to quickly take a look at. Yes, I know that it's the minister that is supposed to provide clearance or guidance on that, but I believe the FIRS, being the administrators, should be able to lead that discussion, because as far as I'm concerned, it's almost like leaving money on the table. There are many companies who are waiting to see what exactly is the guidance on this, and are we able to pay tax in Nigeria and all that. I believe that FIRS should lead that discussion so that we have clarity on that too, so that if there's any tax to be collected in that regard, that tax will start coming in.
Thank you very much, Chinedu. And I'll just take a point from that because of the last thing that you mentioned, which this point I'm talking about is with respect to flexible and strict interpretation of tax laws during this COVID-19 crisis and going forward as well. There have been cases where there will be judicial activism. You see things that are not exactly in the law, but there is an interpretation just to suit collection of tax. So should we expect a more flexible interpretation of tax laws in light of this COVID-19 pandemic? And to what extent can tax authorities and courts go in the attempt to balance the interest of taxpayers and the government? You mentioned one instance, for instance, significant economic presence. What should we expect? I would like to hear from Mr. Agbonjibola. What should we expect the FIRS to do in respect of this significant economic presence?
Yeah, thanks, Temitope. I think Chinedu had aptly summarized the issue with SCP. The Finance Act requires the Minister of Finance to do a regulation to clarify that issue. I can say that work is almost concluded on that. I'm hoping that in the matter of don't let me suggest anything, but very what we are expecting from the minister will come out, and then we will all have some level of clarity on the issue of SEP. But I mean, on the commentary of Temitope as to liberal and strict interpretation of the law, well, I'm sorry, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just an accountant. But my understanding of the tax laws is that they are interpreted on the basis of the wordings or the letters of the tax legislations. And I think there are one or two judgment of the court that has emphasized that. And so there's nothing called liberal so there's no issue of liberal or strict interpretation. That's just the law expects just one interpretation of the tax law, and that is what we try to do. But again, in order to support our taxpayers during this very difficult time, that is why we have had a number of palliatives, and we are continually monitoring the situations. If we believe that we need to do more, definitely we are also going to do more to continue to assist our taxpayers.
Thank you very much. It's been an insightful session. I would like to get your final comments, but before that, there is one of our participants here who is asking a question that, well, you've talked about incentives and all of that, and someone is talking about the 50% payee rebate that is meant to be passed by the House of Rep. I'm not sure we'll be able to address that question here, but what I would like to say to some of our participants is that, I mean, you can always contact us and get updates on all of that, because that bill has not been passed as it's were. But someone else is asking, this is Muiwa Aderibigbe, and he's saying, can any fresh audits be conducted during this season? I'd like us to just take that question before we get your final comments and we round off.
Is that to me or to Chinedu?
Yes. Can any fresh audits be conducted during the season?
Yes, it can be, as long as one, we are not having physical contacts. I have explained to you, there have been suggestions of using technology to do our examinations, which we are also buying into. So once we have system that we have tested and is running properly, yes, we can do our tax examinations remotely, even during this time, if they need be. But what FRS has suspended is physical field visit to taxpayers' offices because of this time where we are in. Unless it becomes a matter of life and death, we do not expect physical field visits. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have lots of questions here to be answered. What I would say to our participants is that we will respond to some of them on our social media handles, so please follow us on our social media handles. But I would like to take the final comments from Chinedu, and then we'll come back to Mr. Agbonjibola.
I mean, so thanks to Tobe for this session. I really enjoyed it. I think just to put a bit of more comment on what you mentioned about the court interpretation of some tax laws in the past. I think what has happened in the past was that the tax laws were not dynamic enough to catch up with the business practices in some instances. So it was as if the courts were trying to stretch the law to be able to catch certain businesses. What's important is that the tax law has to be dynamic. So Finance Acts kind of solved some of the problems. And if FRS as tax administrators, continue to stay close to taxpayers, understand the businesses, understand the tax issues, and keep providing guidance, such that at least every couple of years we should be able to revisit our tax laws to make sure that they are dynamic enough to measure the businesses they are trying to tax. The issue of whether strict or legal interpretation will be limited. I think that's how I will put that. But it's a difficult period for everybody, both taxpayers and tax authorities. And to the extent that we work together and understand the needs of each other and continue, I think we will do well. We will survive this.
Thank you very much, Chinedu. Mr. Agbonjibola, your final remarks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anderson Tax, for organizing this webinar, and thanks particularly for Chinedu, who has been very wonderful in his contributions. Thanks very much for this platform. My message is very simple. The cost of compliance is much cheaper than the cost of non-compliance. Second message is the survival of Nigeria is critical, is paramount and prime. We must ensure that Nigeria survives. And one way that happens is when taxpayers fulfill their tax-paying obligations, so that we can support our men and women in the front line, the doctors, the nurses, and all of those guys who are the ones facing this coronavirus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. I would say a very big thank you to Mr. Agbonjibola. He's the Director and Head Tax Policy and Advisory Department at the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Thank you very much for your time. Chinedu Ezomike, Partner and Head Commercial Practice at Anderson Tax. Thank you very much for your time. And we hope that when we call you the next time, you're going to find time to be part of this session. It's been an insightful one. It's been a revealing one, I believe, for most of our participants as well. I would like to encourage our participants to follow us on our social media handles. We'll be having another webinar session in a matter of weeks. And so we'd like that you also join us for that session. We have a training session that is talking about designing an effective tax strategy for mitigating tax risk in a remote working world coming up soon. So when you get those invites, I would like you to just key into those programs so that, I mean, we can make Nigeria work, like Mr. Agbonjibola has said repeatedly. Thank you, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.